A ruthless prison gang attacks an innocent man, but they have no idea who he really is. A living ghost. A legendary Delta Force commander. And now, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Felix Ghost Coleridge woke up to the cold bite of metal against his skin. His wrists ached from the tight cuffs, his back pressed against the steel bench of the prison transport van. The scent of sweat, gasoline, and something metallic, maybe blood, filled the air. The other inmates, 6 in total, sat in silence, their eyes either cast downward or darting around with suspicion. No one spoke. No one needed to. Felix exhaled slowly, his breath steady. He had been trained to control fear, to suppress it until it became nothing more than a dull whisper in the back of his mind. But this situation was different. This wasn't war. This wasn't an enemy he could track or eliminate. This was a cage. A system built to break men. The events leading up to this moment still felt like a blur. One moment, he was living a quiet life in South Carolina, working as a mechanic, keeping his head down. The next, flashing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. Armed officers dragged him out of his truck, pinned him to the ground, and read charges he didn't understand. Murder. He had never seen the victim before. No connection, no motive. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded killer. The judge barely glanced at him before passing the sentence. 25 years. No parole. No appeal. And now, he was on his way to Blackmont Correctional Facility, a privately run supermax prison with a reputation so brutal that even hardened criminals feared it. The van jerked to a stop. Chains rattled as the inmates prepared to step into their new reality. The doors swung open, and blinding daylight flooded in. Armed guards stood like statues, their rifles at the ready. "Move," one of them barked. Felix stepped out, his boots crunching against gravel. The prison loomed ahead, a fortress of concrete and steel. High walls topped with razor wire. Watchtowers with snipers scanning every movement. There was no escape. The intake process was methodical, dehumanizing. Fingerprints. Mugshots. Strip search. A jumpsuit with his inmate number 73408 stitched across the chest. The guards barely acknowledged him as they shoved him through the halls. His file was thick, but it wasn't full of criminal records. It was redacted military documents. Classified. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know what he had done. As he was led toward his cell block, other prisoners took notice. Some watched in silence, analyzing. Others sneered, sensing fresh meat. Felix wasn't just walking into a prison. He was walking into a war zone. Felix had been in Blackmont for only 3 days, but he already felt the tension wrapping around him like a noose. The prison operated under its own brutal laws, laws that had nothing to do with the guards or the warden. Power belonged to the gangs. Felix stayed quiet, kept to himself. He had no interest in alliances or rivalries. That didn't matter. In Blackmont, neutrality was weakness. And weakness got men killed. It started in the chow hall. Felix carried his tray to an empty table in the corner, his instincts telling him to keep his back to the wall. The food was barely edible, watery beans, a slab of overcooked meat, and stale cornbread. He had eaten worse. The room buzzed with low conversations, the occasional burst of laughter. But something felt off. The energy shifted. He noticed it before he saw them. A group of 5 men moved toward him with slow, deliberate steps. White supremacists, he recognized the prison tattoos immediately. The leader was a thick-necked brute with a shaved head, a swastika inked across his throat. Cobra. Felix had heard his name whispered. A gang enforcer with a reputation for crushing new inmates. Cobra stopped in front of Felix's table and smirked. "This table's ours," he said. Felix didn't move. He simply looked at the man, then back at his food. Cobra chuckled, glancing at his crew. Looks like we got a tough guy. Felix didn't respond. Cobra's smirk faded. He leaned in, placing his hands on the table. I don't like repeating myself, boy. You either pay rent, or you get bled out. Felix set his fork down. His mind worked fast, assessing. 5 men. Muscular, but slow. Cobra was the biggest threat, but his stance was wrong, too heavy on his right foot. The others were positioning themselves, preparing to strike. He had 2 options. Comply. Or send a message. Felix chose the second. With lightning speed, he grabbed his metal tray and slammed it against Cobra's face. Bone crunched. Blood sprayed. The room went silent. Before the others could react, Felix was already moving. He drove his elbow into the ribs of the closest man, spinning to block a wild punch from another. His knee shot up, shattering a nose. He disarmed a sharpened toothbrush from one of them, flipping it in his grip and pressing it to the man's throat. In less than 5 seconds, 3 men were down, bleeding and groaning. The other 2 hesitated, suddenly unsure. Felix tightened his grip on the shiv and whispered, "Walk away." They did. Fast. Cobra lay on the ground, clutching his broken nose, his eyes full of rage. "You're dead," he spat. Felix crouched next to him. "I was dead a long time ago." Guards rushed in, batons drawn. Felix knew what was coming. Solitary. Beatings. Retaliation. But as they dragged him away, he wasn't thinking about the punishment. He was thinking about the war he had just started. Felix sat on the cold concrete floor of solitary confinement, his back against the wall, his breath steady. He had been in worse places. Darker places. Places where the silence wasn't just empty, it was filled with the weight of waiting death. They had thrown him in here after the fight in the chow hall. The guards didn't ask questions. They didn't care who started it. To them, it was just another day in Blackmont. Another inmate getting what he deserved. Felix didn't mind the isolation. It gave him time to think. To plan. Because after what he did to Cobra, there would be consequences. Footsteps echoed down the hall. The slot in the metal door slid open. "You got a visitor," a guard muttered. "Lucky you." Felix didn't have family. No lawyer. No one outside who gave a damn about him. So whoever was visiting, they weren't here for friendly conversation. Minutes later, he was dragged into an interrogation room, a cramped space with nothing but a steel table and 2 chairs. The cuffs around his wrists dug into his skin as he was forced into a seat. Across from him sat an older black man, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, his dark eyes sharp. He wore an orange jumpsuit like everyone else, but there was something different about him. A presence. A quiet authority. Felix didn't speak. He waited. The man smiled slightly, nodding to himself. "Yeah. I thought so." Felix narrowed his eyes. "You know me?" The man leaned back. "I know of you. Name's Otis Briggs. Been in this hellhole a long time. Long enough to recognize a soldier when I see one." Felix didn't react, but inside, alarms went off. Otis tapped his finger on the table. "You ain't no street thug. You took down 5 men in seconds. Precision. Efficiency. That don't come from nowhere." Felix kept his face blank. "You're mistaken." Otis chuckled. "Nah, son. See, I knew a Felix Coleridge once. Back in the day. Word was, he was a ghost. Some kind of elite operator. Delta, maybe. But he died overseas." He paused, his sharp gaze locking onto Felix's. "Only, it looks like he didn't." Silence. Felix felt his heartbeat slow. Control. Discipline. You got the wrong man, he said finally. Otis just smiled. Sure. He leaned forward, voice lowering. Look, I don't care about your past. But what I do care about is your future. And right now? You ain't got one. You made an enemy out of Cobra and his crew. That means you got two choices. Make peace, or make war. Felix didn't hesitate. I don't make peace. Otis grinned. Good. 'Cause war just found you. The door swung open. A guard stepped in. Time's up, he barked. Otis stood, sliding his chair back. He studied Felix for a moment, then nodded. Stay alive, soldier. You're gonna need more than fists to get out of this one. As Felix was dragged back to his cell, his mind raced. Someone in this prison knew who he really was. And if Otis knew, others would, too. It was only a matter of time before the past he buried came back to life. Felix barely had time to settle back into his cell before he felt it, the shift in the air, the sense of unseen eyes tracking his every move. The moment he stepped back into general population, he wasn't just another inmate anymore. He was a target. Word spread fast in Blackmont. Faster than the guards, faster than the cameras. Every man in this prison now knew what he did to Cobra. And every man was waiting to see what happened next. Felix knew how this worked. Prison wasn't about strength, it was about power. And power came from fear. Cobra's gang had ruled through intimidation, through making an example of anyone who defied them. If they let Felix walk free after what he did, their reputation would shatter. So he wasn't surprised when, later that night, two guards appeared outside his cell. Warden wants to see you, one of them said. Felix held their gaze for a second longer than necessary. They weren't just here to deliver a message. They were here to warn him. Whatever was coming next wouldn't be good. They marched him through the dimly lit corridors, past rows of locked cells, past inmates who watched in silence. Some nodded in quiet respect. Others smirked, already smelling blood in the air. The guards led him into a spacious office, nicer than he expected for a prison. Dark wood furniture, a polished desk, a large window overlooking the yard. At the center of it all sat Warden Harlan Graves. A tall, lean man in his 50s, Graves had the air of someone who had seen too much and enjoyed every second of it. His suit was crisp, his silver hair slicked back, his pale blue eyes unreadable. He didn't look up right away. He flipped through Felix's file instead, tapping a finger against the thick stack of redacted military reports. Finally, he spoke. You know what I hate about this job? His voice was smooth, almost casual. Paperwork. Too much of it. Especially when an inmate like you starts making my life difficult. Felix said nothing. Graves glanced up, studying him with a hint of amusement. I have to admit, though. I'm impressed. 5 men, in seconds. That's not normal. That's trained. Felix met his gaze, his expression cold. I got lucky. Graves smirked. No, you didn't. He leaned back, folding his hands together. See, I run this place a certain way. Balance. The gangs keep order, and I let them. Makes my job easier. But when someone like you comes along and upsets that balance, it forces me to make decisions. Felix already knew where this was going. I assume you want me dead, he said. Graves chuckled. Oh, no. Not yet. He tapped a single finger against the desk. But I do need to remind people who's in charge. Which means, you're going to suffer. The door behind Felix creaked open. Heavy footsteps. 2 more guards. Big. Mean-looking. Felix's muscles tensed. He had felt this before. The moment before violence. Graves sighed. "I tell you not to fight back, but I think we both know you will." Felix didn't hesitate. The first guard reached for him, Felix moved first. He twisted, slamming an elbow into the man's throat, then turned just in time to block a punch from the second. The hit landed hard against his ribs, but he ignored the pain. He drove his knee up, smashing it into the second guard's face. Blood sprayed. Then the baton cracked against the back of his skull. White-hot pain exploded in his vision. His knees buckled. He felt hands grabbing him, dragging him down. A boot slammed into his stomach. Then another. Graves watched, calm, detached. When it was over, Felix lay on the floor, breathing hard, his vision swimming. Graves stood, adjusting his tie. "I'll make this simple, Coleridge." His voice was eerily casual. "You don't belong here. You don't follow the rules. That means you have two options." Felix spit blood onto the polished floor. "Let me guess. Join Cobra's crew, or die." Graves smiled. "Something like that." Felix pushed himself up to his knees, his body screaming in protest. He grinned, teeth bloody. "Go to hell." Graves sighed. "Wrong answer." He turned to the guards. "Take him to the yard. Let the animals have their fun." Felix was dragged away, his mind already racing. This wasn't a prison fight anymore. This was a death sentence. The prison yard at Blackmont wasn't just a place for exercise. It was an arena. A hunting ground. A place where debts were collected, and power was displayed. Felix staggered as the guards dragged him outside, his ribs aching from the beating. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. Inmates clustered in groups, some lifting weights, others gambling or just watching, waiting for blood to spill. Felix didn't have to guess what was coming next. Cobra was waiting. He stood near the center of the yard, his nose still swollen and bruised from their last encounter. His crew surrounded him, 7 men this time. White supremacists, all inked up with prison tattoos. They were grinning, hungry for payback. One of the guards leaned close to Felix's ear. "Don't die too fast. The warden likes a good show." Then they let him go. Felix rolled his shoulders, feeling the weight of bruises and cracked ribs. His mind went cold, calculating. He had fought outnumbered before. He had fought injured before. But this was different. He wasn't a soldier anymore. No weapons. No backup. Just him. Cobra stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "I told you, didn't I?" His voice was thick with amusement. "I told you you were dead." Felix exhaled slowly. "You talk too much." Cobra's grin vanished. He lunged. Felix moved, dodging the first wild punch, but before he could counter, 2 men grabbed him from behind. They weren't making the same mistake twice. A fist smashed into his stomach. Pain shot through his ribs. Another hit cracked against his jaw, snapping his head to the side. They held him firm while Cobra stepped in close. "You thought you were special," Cobra hissed, pressing a thumb into Felix's bruised ribs. The pain made his vision flicker. "But you ain't nothing." Felix gritted his teeth. He had been here before. Captured. Beaten. Left to die. And every time, he came back stronger. Cobra pulled back his fist for the final blow. That was his mistake. Felix twisted violently, throwing his weight sideways. The 2 men holding him lost their grip just enough. He yanked one forward, using his momentum to slam his forehead into the man's nose. Cartilage crunched. The second man hesitated, Felix spun, driving an elbow into his throat. Cobra barely had time to react before Felix ducked low and drove a punch into his kidney. Cobra grunted, staggering back, but his men were already moving in. Felix grabbed one of them and whipped him around as a human shield, just as another inmate swung a makeshift knife. The blade sank into the wrong man's side. Chaos erupted. Guards didn't interfere. Not yet. They were letting it play out. Felix moved like a shadow, dodging, striking, using every muscle memory burned into him from years of combat. He took hits, hard ones, but he gave worse. He broke one man's knee with a savage kick. He sent another crashing into the pavement with a brutal shoulder slam. Then it was just him and Cobra. The bigger man's chest heaved. His crew lay groaning on the ground. "You don't stop, do you?" Cobra spat. Felix wiped blood from his lip. "Not until I bury you." Cobra roared, charging forward like a bull. Felix didn't move. Not until the last second. He sidestepped, pivoted, and drove his elbow into the side of Cobra's head. The impact sent the bigger man stumbling. Felix followed up with a brutal strike to the throat. Cobra's eyes bulged as he clutched his neck, gasping for air. Felix grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close. His voice was calm. "Deadly. This is your last chance," he whispered. "Walk away." Cobra's body trembled, but he nodded, the fight finally drained out of him. Felix shoved him back and turned toward the guards, who were now stepping in. The yard was silent. The inmates had just witnessed something they weren't used to seeing. A man standing alone against the system. And winning. Felix didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He knew what came next. The warden wouldn't let this slide. He had just declared war. And war was what Felix did best. Felix sat on the edge of his cot, his muscles aching, his knuckles raw. The walls of his cell felt closer than usual, as if the entire prison was squeezing in around him. He had survived the yard. He had beaten Cobra and his crew. But he wasn't safe. Blackmont didn't allow men like him to walk away untouched. The balance had shifted, and the warden wouldn't let that stand. Felix didn't have to wait long. That night, as the prison lights dimmed and the facility settled into uneasy silence, he heard it, the click of his cell door unlocking. Not normal. Not routine. His instincts screamed at him. He barely had time to react before the door swung open and 4 shadows rushed inside. Hit squad. They moved fast, no words, just fists and steel. One of them wielded a shank, a jagged piece of sharpened metal meant for only one thing. Felix exploded off his cot, intercepting the first attacker before he even got past the doorframe. His forearm snapped up, blocking a punch, then countered with a brutal elbow to the temple. The man dropped, unconscious before he hit the ground. But there were 3 more. Felix sidestepped a wild stab, grabbing the wrist mid-strike. A sharp twist, bone cracked. The shank clattered to the floor. The other 2 grabbed him from behind, trying to wrestle him down. Felix didn't let them. He stomped backward, slamming one into the metal bunk, then threw his head back, shattering the nose of the other. Blood splattered. The grip loosened. He spun and struck, a punch to the throat, a knee to the gut. Seconds later, it was over. 4 men lay in the cramped cell, groaning. Felix stood over them, chest heaving. Alive. Still standing. The prison alarms didn't go off. No guards came running. This wasn't an unauthorized hit. This was sanctioned. Felix wiped blood from his lip, his mind already working. He wasn't just fighting gangs anymore. The system itself wanted him dead. That meant he needed allies. And he knew exactly who to find. The next morning, Felix walked straight to the south wing of the prison, a sector dominated by the old-timers. Lifers. Men who had survived decades inside Blackmont. They weren't part of any gang, but their respect carried weight. Otis Briggs sat at a chess table, moving pieces with deliberate slowness. He barely looked up as Felix approached. "Figured you'd be dead by now," Otis muttered, shifting a pawn. Felix sat across from him. "They tried." Otis sighed, rubbing his beard. "And yet here you are." Felix leaned in. "I need information." Otis finally met his gaze, eyes sharp. "Now you're talking like a man who finally gets it. What do you want to know?" Felix glanced around. No guards were close enough to hear. "Who put the hit out on me?" Otis smirked. "Boy, you already know the answer to that." Felix clenched his jaw. "Graves." Otis nodded. "Warden don't like men he can't control. And you? You're a damn grenade without a pin." He paused, then added, "But the hit didn't come from him direct. It came through the cartel." Felix exhaled slowly. He had expected as much. Blackmont ran on a hierarchy. The cartel controlled the drug flow. The Aryans controlled the muscle. The guards controlled nothing. And Graves? He just kept the machine running. Felix stared at the chessboard. The game Otis had been playing wasn't just random moves. It was strategy. Control. "This place is a powder keg," Felix muttered. Otis chuckled. "You're just now figuring that out." Felix straightened. If the cartel wanted him dead, they'd try again. And next time, it wouldn't be in his cell. It'd be somewhere with no escape. He met Otis's gaze. "I need to get to the outside." Otis studied him for a long moment. "You mean out of Blackmont?" Felix shook his head. "I mean outside these walls. Someone put me in here. Someone high up. And I need to find out who." Otis leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Dangerous thinking, son." Felix's expression hardened. "I'm already a dead man walking." Otis nodded slowly. "Then it sounds like you need a plan." Felix stared at the chessboard. Checkmate wasn't about brute force. It was about seeing the whole board. And he was just getting started. Felix knew the next move had to be his. If he waited, the next attack wouldn't be a sloppy prison hit, it would be final. The cartel wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He had to go on the offensive. But first, he needed leverage. The problem was, Blackmont wasn't just a prison. It was a system, a machine where everything and everyone served a purpose. The cartel ran drugs through corrupt guards, the Aryans handled enforcement, and the lifers like Otis? They were the ones who knew everything but stayed out of the politics. Felix needed a weak spot in that machine. A crack he could pry open. And Otis, despite his quiet wisdom, wasn't going to hand it to him for free. They sat across from each other at the chessboard, the same one Otis played at every morning. The yard hummed with activity around them, weightlifters grunting, low murmurs of gambling, the ever-present watchful eyes of men waiting for an opportunity. Felix studied the board, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed to hit the cartel. Hard. Otis watched him carefully, finally speaking. "You're thinking like a soldier again." Felix didn't look up. "I am a soldier." "Nah," Otis said, moving a rook forward. "Soldiers follow orders. You ain't following nobody. You're playing a different game." Felix's jaw tightened. "Then tell me how to win." Otis chuckled, shaking his head. "Ain't about winning, boy. It's about surviving long enough to make the right move." He tapped the board. "You want to take down the cartel? You gotta hit them where they feel it most." Felix narrowed his eyes. "Their drug supply." Otis nodded slowly. "Now you're thinking, Dot." The cartel's power in Blackmont came from one thing, drugs. They controlled every shipment, every deal, every addict who needed a fix. And the real money didn't just come from selling it to inmates. It came from moving it through Blackmont. The prison was a perfect front, a fortress where product came in clean and left even cleaner. If Felix choked the supply, he wouldn't just piss them off. He'd force them into desperation. Desperation led to mistakes. Otis leaned back, rubbing his beard. Ain't gonna be easy. You mess with their money, they'll come at you with everything. Felix's lips curled into a faint smirk. They already are. The plan. Felix spent the next 2 days watching. Studying. He knew the cartel's operations worked like a pipeline. The drugs came in through the kitchen, smuggled in shipments of food and supplies. They were cut and distributed through a few key inmates, middlemen who handled the transactions. Then the real money got moved out through dirty guards, who made sure the business stayed untouchable. Felix needed to break the chain. And he knew exactly how. The strike. It had to happen fast. Felix waited until midnight, when the guards were lazy, their rounds predictable. He moved through the halls like a shadow, slipping past the half-asleep CO at the infirmary entrance. The target? Ramirez. He wasn't a cartel leader. He was worse, a mid-level handler, the kind of man who kept the operation running but didn't have the protection of top leadership. If Felix hit him, it would send shockwaves through the whole network. Ramirez was alone, counting inventory in a storage room, when Felix stepped inside. The man barely had time to react before Felix slammed him against the metal shelves, sending bottles and supplies crashing to the floor. Felix's hand clamped over his mouth. "Scream, and you die," he whispered. Ramirez's eyes went wide with terror. Felix leaned in. "You're gonna tell me everything about how the cartel moves product. Or I break every bone in your body." Ramirez shook his head wildly, panic flashing across his face. They'll kill me." Felix pressed harder, his voice low and deadly. "I'll kill you first." Silence. A long moment of tension. Then Ramirez broke. It comes through the loading dock," he stammered. "Inside food shipments. The kitchen guys break it down, distribute it. The guards move it out." Felix already knew most of that. He needed more. "Who runs it?" he demanded. "Names." Ramirez swallowed hard. "Lobo. He's in D block. He handles the product inside. But outside? The warden." His voice shook. "Graves takes a cut of everything." Felix froze for half a second. He had suspected Graves was dirty. But this? This confirmed it. He let go of Ramirez and stepped back. I told you what you wanted," Ramirez stammered. "Please." Felix's fist snapped forward, knocking him out cold. He didn't kill him. That wasn't the point. The cartel would find Ramirez like this. They'd know someone was coming for them. And they'd be forced to react. Felix stepped over the unconscious man and disappeared into the night. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war. Felix didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his cot, muscles tense, mind sharp. The entire prison was shifting, he could feel it. The cartel would find Ramirez. They'd know someone hit their supply chain. And they'd respond hard. By morning, Blackmont was a powder keg waiting to explode. Felix wasn't afraid. He was ready. Retaliation. It came faster than expected. Felix was walking through C Block, heading toward the yard, when he noticed the silence. Too many eyes watching him. Too many men moving strangely. He felt it before it happened. A figure lunged from the side, swinging a shank straight for his ribs. Felix twisted, catching the attacker's wrist mid-strike. The blade stopped inches from his side. Then the second man came from behind. Felix dropped low, the shank slicing through empty air above his head. He countered fast, a sharp elbow to the first man's jaw, then a brutal kick to the second's knee. The third attacker, bigger, stronger, grabbed Felix from behind in a bear hug, trying to pin his arms. Felix gritted his teeth, slammed his head backward, felt the satisfying crack of cartilage breaking. The man staggered. Felix ripped free, spun, and drove his fist into the attacker's throat. 3 men down. Felix stood over them, breathing hard. The yard was dead silent, inmates watching from a distance. No one moved. No one interfered. Then, slowly, the crowd parted. And Lobo stepped forward. Confrontation. Lobo wasn't just a cartel soldier. He was the enforcer inside Blackmont. The man responsible for every deal, every hit, every body that dropped when someone crossed the wrong people. He was tall, lean, dangerous, muscles coiled beneath his jumpsuit, his knuckles already scarred from years of violence. Felix wiped blood from his lip and met Lobo's gaze. "You made a mistake," Lobo said, voice calm. Felix smirked. "Then come fix it." Lobo didn't hesitate. He moved fast, faster than Cobra, faster than anyone Felix had fought so far. A quick jab, testing. Felix dodged. Another strike, this one aimed for his throat. Felix blocked it, countering with a sharp elbow toward Lobo's ribs. Lobo twisted at the last second, barely avoiding it. He was good. Felix was better. Lobo swung again, Felix stepped inside the punch, grabbed his arm, and twisted, forcing Lobo off balance. Before Lobo could recover, Felix drove his knee into his stomach, then followed up with a brutal strike to the jaw. Lobo stumbled back, dazed. Felix didn't stop. A right hook. A left. Another knee. The final hit sent Lobo crashing to the ground, blood dripping from his mouth. The yard was dead silent. Felix took a slow breath, scanning the faces watching him. He wasn't just another inmate anymore. He had just taken down the cartel's top man. And everyone knew it. The warden's move. Felix barely had time to return to his cell before the guards arrived. They didn't say a word. Just grabbed him, cuffed him, and dragged him back to Warden Graves' office. Graves sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, watching Felix with amusement. "You really don't know how to keep your head down, do you?" the warden sighed. Felix didn't answer. Graves leaned forward. "You just took down my best supplier. That's bad for business." Felix smirked. "Good." The warden's eyes darkened. He stood up, circling the desk. "Let's get one thing straight. You're not some hero. You're not here to clean up Blackmont. You're here because someone wanted you gone." Felix's smirk faded. Graves knew something. The warden sighed, shaking his head. "You were supposed to rot in here. Instead, you're making waves." He paused. "Which means I have a choice. Either I let the cartel kill you, or I use you." Felix's eyes narrowed. "Use me for what?" Graves smiled coldly. "The same reason you were put in here. Someone on the outside wants you buried. I want to know who." Felix's muscles tensed. This was a game. A trap. But it was also an opportunity. Graves walked back to his desk. "I can make things easy for you, Coleridge. Fewer eyes on you. More freedom to move. All you have to do." He smirked. "Find me the real players." Felix exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about Blackmont anymore. This was bigger. Someone powerful had put him here. And they weren't done with him yet. Felix leaned forward, eyes locked on the warden. "Deal." The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Felix Coleridge's story isn't just about survival, it's about transformation. What started as a wrongful imprisonment became a battlefield, where every move was life or death, every decision a calculated risk. Felix entered Blackmont as a man trying to escape his past, but by the end, he was forced to embrace it. He wasn't just another inmate. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a weapon, one sharpened by betrayal, violence, and war. The real enemy was never just Cobra, the cartel, or even Warden Graves. The true enemy was the system itself, the unseen forces that put him behind bars, the ghosts from his past who wanted him buried. And now, Felix isn't just playing defense anymore. The final chapter isn't about whether he survives Blackmont. It's about what happens when he gets out. Because the people who put him here, they should have finished the job. Now, he's coming for them.